Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, talks between the UK and the EU to agree a post-Brexit trade deal are ongoing, despite there being just 2 weeks left to the end of the transition period. I'll be discussing the flashpoints of the week with Simon Pusey in the studio, and we'll be crossing over to Stockholm for a view from the continent with Glenn Hodgson, the CEO of the think tank Free Trade Europa. And on Thursday, the Bank of England kept its monetary policy stance unchanged as much of the country enters the festive period under the highest tier of coronavirus restrictions. I'll be fleshing out the details with senior research analyst Lookman Ottanuga. Then later, I'll be speaking with the CEO of African Teen Geeks, Lindewe Matlali in Johannesburg, about the COVID-19 disruptions to the African education sector. But now over to our first topic, Brexit. The European Parliament will not meet to ratify a Brexit trade deal unless one is signed before Sunday, meaning Britain is expected to face a no-deal exit if nothing is agreed by the end of the weekend. According to the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, talks between the two are in the final stretch. He added that there was good progress, but last stumbling blocks remain. His comments come as British MPs were warned they could be recalled from the Christmas recess next week if a post-Brexit trade deal is secured with Brussels. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Wednesday he hoped the European Union would see sense and agree a post-Brexit trade deal, adding all the bloc needed to do was recognise Britain's right to sovereignty.
Mr. Speaker, there's every opportunity, notwithstanding the slight air of, uncharacteristic air of gloom from the right honourable gentleman, there's every opportunity, every hope I have that our friends and partners across the Channel will see sense and do a deal. And all that takes is for them to understand that the UK has a natural right, like every other country, to want to be able to control its own laws and its own fishing grounds, which ought to be important, I would have thought, to the right honourable gentleman. But whatever happens in the next few days, I know that this country will prosper mightily on the terms that we agree with our European friends, whatever they may be, whether they're Australian or Canadian. He can go forward with a high heart and confidence into 2021, knowing there are great opportunities for Scotland and the rest of the UK.
For more on this, I'm now being joined by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, we've got less than 2 weeks to go. Have there been any developments since the last time we spoke?
There have been developments. It is embarrassing that I keep sitting back here and saying that they're even still talking about it, because we've obviously been told that there's going to be deadlines time and time again, and those deadlines have been kicked down the can down the road. And what I don't really understand is that this deal, if there is a deal, needs to be ratified, and that is a hell of a lot of paperwork and court stuff to be done, legal issues, and that was supposedly was going to take 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and we obviously only have 2 weeks. So the new deadline, we'll be back here next week, won't we? But the new deadline is Sunday now. This is coming from the EU side of things. They're saying this Sunday everything needs to be wrapped up so that they can have a vote on it, and obviously all member states need to pass that vote. So that's another possible sort of blockage. But by Sunday, Michel Barnier today saying that Friday they're going to try and get a deal this week. He's calling it difficult but possible. Michael Gove, the UK Brexit MP, has been saying that both sides have been working night and day to try and get this done. And yeah, difficult but possible seems to be the sort of the main phrase. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, his spokesman today, saying that a no-deal outcome is still more likely. But I think the fact that both sides are sort of talking about Sunday shows that there has been quite a lot of movement. Fisheries, I think, still is the main problem. But things like governance seem to have been compromised, and there does seem to be movement in terms of the UK side moving a slightly friendlier way. But yeah, like I said, I think we're probably going to be back here next week still talking about them working out a deal, because it seems like every deadline that they have, they sort of push on further. But at the moment, Sunday is the new deadline. A little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, I think, in terms of there potentially being a deal. Actually,
I want to ask you very briefly, Simon, about French President Emmanuel Macron's positive COVID test. We did see this a couple of weeks ago with somebody within the negotiation team. He's been the toughest. Do you think perhaps him being, on his sickbed could push hopes for a deal or no?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? If he can't face-to-face rally the troops against a deal, but you're right, he is a harsh critic, and whether, maybe the UK side can sort of mute him on Zoom or whatever when he's sort of saying things that he doesn't like about it. But yeah, he is the main driving force. And there are a couple of other, the Netherlands as well, have been sort of slightly critical in terms of trying to give a deal to Britain. But I'm not sure it'll have too big an effect, because a lot of these negotiations will have been going on from a distance anyway. But that is a sort of an interesting big point. And another thing is that the UK are currently working on a small trade deal with the US. This has come from the American Trade Minister, who's saying that they're doing sort of trying to get a light trade deal going with just a couple of products, things like Scotch whisky are going to have without tariffs. That's before, obviously, Joe Biden takes office. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. So a few things going on here. But yeah, hopefully we're going to have some solid news by the weekend.
Hopefully. Thank you, Simon. 4.5 years after 52% of UK voters opted to leave the European Union, lawmakers and the public are still struggling to decide what they want their future ties to the bloc to look like. Many Brits want a Brexit deal that keeps them close to the EU, allowing deep trade links, free migration and shared regulations. Others would prefer, if no satisfactory plan emerges, to crash out with no deal in place. Let's get a view from Europe, and for that I'm now being joined by Glenn Hodgson in Stockholm. Glenn is the CEO of the think tank Free Trade Europa. Glenn Hodgson, CEO of Free Trade Europa, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Glenn, we've been speaking about Brexit for the best part of a year. It's been ongoing for about 5 years. What's your personal analysis of the toing and throwing that's been going on for the past 2 weeks?
Absolutely. Well, it's 10 to 12 now, or maybe even 2 minutes to 12. The clock is well and truly ticking, and there's a great deal of uncertainty, a great deal of bad feeling which has been created, unfortunately, and businesses, individuals don't know what they'll be dealing with as of the 1st of January 2021. And I think there's also a lot of patience has run out on certainly on the continent. I think a lot of leaders, decision makers and government departments are sick and tired of how much time, effort, money has actually been put into this. And it may be Christmas, but the amount of goodwill and good cheer is certainly in short supply.
Absolutely. We've been hearing that no less than from Emmanuel Macron, who's really had enough and almost feels as if the German side, Merkel and Ursula von der Leyen, are being too soft on Boris Johnson. The OECD and the British government's own Office for Budget Responsibility have already said that Britain is going to be the worst faring economy in the developed world because of COVID. That's mainly due to the fact that we're a service-based economy. But what about a businessman like you? Do you still see Britain as a viable economic market, or have you kind of turned your back to the Brits?
I will never turn my back on the Brits, and I think there is always the openness. Despite what has gone on, I think that we're each other's biggest trading partners. We share a lot of cultural, economic, and also political links as well. Let's be honest about this. So, regardless of the spats that are ongoing at the moment, I think we need to look at the broader picture. But it's absolutely important that we try and build a few of those bridges and actually sort of create the framework that will allow us to export, import, have trade, sharing ideas, services, but also the rebuilding of our economies at this absolutely crucial time as we hopefully come out of the COVID-19 pandemic.
There was a concern from businesses. You mentioned businesses in your opener there, because of course, typically some people just go to St Pancras, jump on the Eurostar, have a couple of meetings over a glass of wine in Paris. You can't do that anymore. Not only can you not do that in Paris, but you can't do that in 27 other nations. Do you think businesses are prepared? Are you yourself prepared for business meetings in London that, you cannot just do ad hoc as you did before?
And I think this is the big issue, all the sort of the big talk about what's going to happen, trade deals. But the reality, when it comes down to the fact that, how easy will it be for me to be able to come across for a meeting? If I want to sort of hire a car, will my driving license be valid anymore? What extra insurance do I need? What extra healthcare cover will I need? It's these practical things that will really impact individuals. And it'll, one thing that regardless of what happens, the goalposts are still moving, the playing field is still being decided. The reality is that there'll be more administration, there'll be more costs. and it'll be individuals, consumers who will lose out. Very sad state of affairs.
It is a really sad state of affairs. Glenn, before I let you go, I've got to ask you, deal or no deal? I think I've probably asked you this about 4 or 5 times during the year. We are so close to the wire. Last week, Sunday, was the deadline. They extended it. They released a joint statement. So that does show that there is some sort of solidarity. But can a deal be secured in just less than 2 weeks?
And my feeling is still the same as it has been for all the months and years that have gone since that Brexit vote. I just don't see anything but a no deal, a hard Brexit, given the fact that the two sides are so far apart. Both sides are promising very, very different things. And to think at the 11th hour that the European Union will actually give up the fundamental tenets of the internal market just to put in place a deal with the United Kingdom, it's not going to happen, sadly. So what we're going to see is a very complicated, very confused, and very difficult situation for the months and even years ahead. Sad to say, but I think I don't see anything, but we hope for the best, but we expect the worst.
Absolutely. I think that's the motto of 2020, isn't it? Thank you so much, Glenn Hodgson, CEO of Free Trade Europa. To other news now. In the UK, central bank kept its monetary policy stance unchanged on Thursday as much of the country entered the festive period under the highest tier of coronavirus restrictions. The Bank of England kept its main lending rate at 0.1%, having cut twice from 0.75 since the onset of the pandemic in March, and retained its target stock of asset purchases at £895 billion. Well, for more details, I'm now being joined by Lookman Ottanuga, a senior research analyst at FXTM. Lookman Ottanuga, as always, such a pleasure for you to join me on Channel's Business Global. Am I right in saying that the Bank of England's monetary policy stance remaining unchanged is no surprises to anyone?
Thank you for having me here today. Yep, certainly. The unusually uncertain economic environment in the UK economy, thanks to COVID-19 and the Brexit developments, have actually forced the central bank to keep its powder dry on interest rates. I think moving forward, any monetary policy decision the central bank takes in the new year will be heavily influenced by what happens in 2 weeks' time. In regards to the economic outlook, the central bank expects a less severe contraction in Q4. However, this may open the doors to more quantitative easing in 2021.
Gosh, more quantitative easing. It's already sitting at about £850 billion. That's really worrying. But I've got to say, the past couple of days, Lookman, the pound has had a pretty good rally, I would say. That's really because of these renewed Brexit negotiation talks. I know there are only 2 more weeks left, but do you think we're likely to see this positive trend going into next year?
Yeah, it's quite surprising. There's a lot of optimism over Brexit talks, despite the UK and EU simply kicking the can down the road again. The pound is appreciated against every single G10 currency, but this could be limited because fundamentally, the 2 key sticking points, a level playing field and fisheries, remain 2 key things that may sabotage any deal. And I think the reality of this, as the deadline looms, the transition deadline looms, may limit how high the pound could trade against the dollar and other major currencies.
Of course, we've already heard from the OECD and the British government's own Office for Budget Responsibility that unfortunately Britain is likely to be the worst country that is going to fear over what's happened with COVID-19. Our economy is flailing behind all of the other European economies. But would you say going into next year that it's likely to be a Brexit and a no-deal exit or COVID that is going to weigh more heavily on the pound?
Well, both of them could actually weigh heavily on a pound. As the Bank of England has already warned, if we have a case where the UK actually exits the EU with no deal and the COVID menace makes a return despite the vaccine optimism, the UK economy may face a contraction of up to 8% over the long term. But I think if you want to put one compared to the other, I think the main thing that continues to hit the UK economy is COVID-19 and fears of possible restrictions to come into play in Q1 of 2021.
Absolutely. Lookman Ottanuga, Senior Research Analyst at FXTM. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. In a moment, I'll be speaking with the CEO of African team Geeks, Lindiwe Matlali, in Johannesburg. But before then, here's some company news for you. JD Sports has agreed to buy the California-based sportswear brand Shoe Palace in an all-cash deal worth $325 million. Genesis, the US owner of JD Sports, will acquire 100% of both Shoe Palace shares plus members' interests in the youth-focused subsidiary Nice Kicks. It comes after JD earlier this month pulled out of talks to buy the embattled British department chain Debenhams, triggering the collapse of other high street stalwarts, including Sir Philip Green's Arcadia. Sportswear giant Adidas has confirmed it could sell its Reebok brand. The German company said it had begun to assess strategic alternatives for Reebok that could include a sale as part of a new 5-year strategy to be set out in March. Adidas bought US-focused Reebok in 2006 for $3.8 billion in an attempt to build more of a presence in the home market of its rival Nike. Britain's Competition and Markets Authority says 44,000 customers of Love Holidays awaiting refunds for trips cancelled because of the coronavirus pandemic will get their money back by the end of March. The regulator said the online travel agent agreed a series of undertakings to meet its obligations after it received hundreds of complaints from consumers related to repayment delays. It is the latest refund intervention made by the watchdog following similar action against lastminute.com, TUI UK and Virgin Holidays. Now over to our next topic. World leaders in education from across the world, including the former heads of states Gordon Brown and Julia Gillard, have met virtually this week to help set in motion far-reaching changes to education in the wake of COVID-19. The Rewired X event seeks to overcome the nuanced challenges faced by the 1.6 billion students across the globe. Chief amongst these is the vital importance of connectivity in underpinning effective distance learning and making education more accessible to all. Linda Way McLarley, founder and CEO of African Teen Geeks, was one of the forum's contributors. Her company exists to eliminate the barriers faced by disadvantaged communities in South Africa by pursuing the STEM subjects of science, technology, engineering and maths. Linda Way McLarley, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. You have been a really busy lady. African Teen Geeks have been invited to take part in the Rewired X conference. Tell me how that came about and how the past couple of days have been for you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. The past couple of days have been exciting. I mean, I've learned so much in meeting amazing people that are doing great work in terms of making sure that education continues during this time. I got invited to the Rewired X conference through an introduction from the UNICEF New York office to the Dubai guys who invited us. So we're really thrilled and excited to be able to share all the exciting work that we are doing in South Africa and Africa as a whole.
Of course, we're finally starting to see the end. Well, we hope we're seeing the end of this awful pandemic that's killed over 1 million people because of the rollout of the vaccine. Education is just one of many sectors that have been disrupted. And according to some of the latest data I have, just 19 million of the 450 million children in Africa have been able to educate themselves remotely. How has your firm, African Teen Geeks, tried to bridge that gap?
We actually responded initially for South Africa by after 4 days after the president announced the lockdown, we then started an online school. But just like Africa in general, we've got a lot of issues with regards to connectivity. So a lot of the children that we wanted to attend our sessions, they were unable to. Though we still had great successes where we had over 500,000 learners who joined our online classes, live classes that we're hosting on Zoom, and also just under 500,000 that watched our classes on YouTube. But I think, moving forward for us as Africa, unfortunately, face-to-face is still the best because we still have so few of our communities have access to internet and the broadband. And when it comes to mobile data in South Africa, for example, we still have the most expensive data cost in the world. So unless those things get addressed, unfortunately, it will continue to be a problem.
Absolutely. We've even seen that issue here where I am in the United Kingdom, in London. You know, you take for granted using a laptop or a device, but not every household has this. What do you think has been the impact for those millions and millions of children that haven't had access to this infrastructure? How have they been able to survive over these past 9, 10 months, up to a year?
Unfortunately, a lot of them have lost the school year. I mean, if you think about Kenya, for example, they were one of the first countries in March to just say, you know, we've lost the school year. You know, in South Africa, the reason that we finished the school year is because our minister was very bullish and insisted, you know, to open the schools. But we were also, they did a great job in opening the schools safely, and we were one of the few countries that have been able to complete the academic year. But what that means is that even during the time when those kids in South Africa who were not able to go back to school, is that the achievement gap between the richest kids and the poor has even gotten worse. Because I know if a child is like, I mean, middle class or higher income kids, they didn't really suffer at all. My children continued to study. It just meant that they were at home and everything, just they were able to pivot online. And that's why we need to make sure that as Africa, I mean, we deal with these issues, specifically with the issues of connectivities and access to devices, because it's not the first time that we have kids not being able to go to school. We had that in West Africa during the Ebola crisis. There have been kids who are not able to go to school in Cameroon because of the war that is going on there. So these are issues that we constantly face. And so we need to take drastic actions around how are we going to deal with that and dealing with the issues of infrastructure and making sure, because what COVID has done has shown that having access to a device and internet is no longer a nice to have, is a human right. Every child should have access to it because, you know, if they don't have, the alternative is that they're never going to have a future.
Absolutely. It's really important. What role, Lindiwe, do teachers and parents play in this, you know, revamped education discourse? Because, of course, as you said, I also did a bit of home learning. Some of those questions a little bit tricky, especially when you're going on devices and you have no idea how to navigate. Have you had to kind of change some of the formats of African Teen Geeks products and services just so that they're easily understandable for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, we were not an edtech platform at all. What we were basically an organization that was working with governments in Africa to create a curriculum for coding and robotics so that we don't get left behind in the fourth industrial revolution. And when this happened, we realized that a lot of the platforms that were providing online schooling were charging, you know, money, and a lot of parents did not have the money to be able to pivot and take their kids, and all those kids were not able to go to private schools. So what we did was we actually became a school, a fully fledged online school, where we ended up hiring 110 teachers and running 110 sessions a day for all the grades, and making sure that is also available, you know, offline. And what we've also done was taking the textbooks, you know, the free government textbooks that we are doing now, we are basically digitizing that and working with mobile platforms in Africa, like the MTNs, specifically looking for those that have an African footprint, to ask them to zero rate our platform so that we can our vision is that by next year, June, we wanna digitize the entire curriculum for Africa and also train teachers across all across the entire continent, and make sure that learners can access all that education platform online, but also on zero-rated platform, those who cannot afford data. And my hope is that, I mean, parents, it's so important because for them to be able to start thinking on investing in devices, because it's no longer, you know, it's so important. I know that we talk about the income and stuff, but I've seen a lot, like, for example, in South Africa, there's a lot of parents that have been investing in buying smartphones for their children. So maybe instead of buying a smartphone, buy a computer, you know, buy a laptop because your children will need that. So the role of parents is also, even in the way we spend our money, the technology we buy, especially in poor households. Maybe instead of having that cute iPhone, let's make sure there's a laptop for everybody at home.
Absolutely. What an important message to end on. Lindiwe Matlali, founder and CEO of African Teen Geeks. Thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Thank you. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.